Playing long-term games with long-term people is one of the things I always encourage folks to do as they get into construction. And today we're going to be tracing the journey over 30 years of Doug Ransom. He is the General Superintendent at JP Cullen, a fifth-generation family-owned construction company based in Wisconsin. Doug started straight out of high school, working on job sites, and has built his career over time to becoming General Superintendent. And if you've been listening for a while, you know that this isn't our first conversation connected to Cullen. I've previously interviewed members of the Cullen family and also George Cullen, the co-president of the business. And you can check out those links in the show notes. And those conversations explore ownership, governance, and succession. But today we're boots on the ground. You'll hear from someone who has lived the Cullen culture from the field up, understanding what it takes to grow from an apprentice to superintendent to general superintendent, how to balance ambition with humility, how to develop younger leaders in the trades, and what it takes to keep someone loyal to a company for 3 decades. Think about that. Doug's been working with Cullen for 30 years. So if you care about field leadership, developing foremen, and building a culture that actually lasts across generations from the field up, then this conversation is for you. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Doug, welcome to Construction Genius.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. Please introduce yourself to the audience.
My name is Doug Ransom. I'm a General Superintendent for JP Cullen Sons, based out of southern Wisconsin. I've been with the company for about 30 years now, and I'm mainly in charge of the concrete work.
Okay. Why concrete? What do you like about concrete?
First one on the job, you kind of set the ground rules for typically if the concrete goes well, the rest of the job goes well. So you kind of start out, I'm a carpenter by trade, and the rest of the more interior stuff wasn't super fun for me. So I like doing more of the structure of the building. Seemed a little bigger, a little more dangerous, when I was young, and that was very appealing.
That's cool. How old were you when you first started working for construction companies?
I was 18 years old. I was out of high school for a month when I started my apprenticeship back in 95. So I'm getting up there in age.
You're not that old. So in 95, 18 years old, you went to work for the union?
Yeah. Yep. Union contractor out of Wisconsin.
What was the first thing you remember learning as you went onto the job site? I got a couple of 18-year-old issues in the house. They're cocky. They think they know it all. They kind of know that they don't know it all, but they think that they do. What was it like for you as you walked out onto the job site there?
I very quickly realized that I took a construction class in high school. It did nothing to prepare me for working out on site. I think my first day, it was 114 degrees out.
Wow.
And I literally knew nothing about construction at the time. As green can get. I went from working at Pizza Hut to union carpenter in the course of about a month. So huge learning curve, that's for sure.
That's great. And how long have you been with Cullen?
30 years.
So you started with Cullen?
Yep. Started with Cullen, been with Cullen my entire career.
That's interesting. As you started getting into the work, you began to learn how to actually do the work. And you wanted to learn that before you started telling other people how to do it. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. I was a big fan of know what you're talking about before you tell other people what to do kind of mentality.
Yeah.
For some reason, it just felt like my word would mean more if people knew what I was talking about.
How did that mindset help you to earn trust with people that you were working with early in your career?
I would say the biggest part was they saw me go through in the trenches, in the mud, doing footings and whatnot. Kind of that been there, done that mentality. Definitely wasn't like I didn't fast track my career by any means. I just kind of let it come naturally. But yeah, that was the biggest thing is people see you do something, they tend to trust your word a little bit more.
Yeah, so that idea of fast track, I know that one of the things that youth struggles from is impatience. And I often talk to guys who are complaining about people coming out of college or high school thinking they're going to make six figures right out of the gate. You know what I mean? When you've been working for a while, you got a foreman opportunity, but you turned it down. Is that right? Because you didn't feel ready?
That's correct. I think I was probably, I'd say maybe in my early 20s, 22 maybe. And it was probably my first like multi-story job. It was back then, I believe it was like a $30-40 million project.
Right.
So it was a good sized project, by far the biggest one I'd ever been on. And they wanted me to run the column crew, and just in awe of the size of the project. Like I said, it was the first big one. And I didn't understand how the whole process kind of worked. I didn't feel comfortable in the process, trying to fit in. So yeah, I just didn't feel like I was ready for it. So I politely turned it down.
Was it a surprise to you that they asked you to be a foreman, or were you expecting that? What was that like?
I wouldn't say I expected it. I think it was one of those, it was a time where we had a lot of work going on. So maybe they just needed some people to run some work. But yeah, I wasn't necessarily surprised. I'd heard people say that I was doing a great job and everything. And so yeah, it wasn't surprising.
Okay. So again, being relatively young, and you're in a dynamic where you're working with guys who are older than you, obviously have more experience than you. People take different levels of responsibility and things like that. What was it like being younger and sort of having this instinct or this understanding that you might be a leader as you were working with folks who were older and had more experience? How did you handle that?
I think I just kind of did my thing. Haters are going to hate, especially back then. I think it was more of a cutthroat kind of thing. Guys were more reluctant to teach you something in fear that you might take their job, as opposed to now. I think people are more willing to teach others, especially in the trades, because it ultimately makes their job easier if the guy next to you knows what they're doing. But back then it just seemed, well, this is the new guy. I'm not going to have to listen to him. I know more than what he does.
Right.
That kind of old school mentality seems to have gone by the wayside, I would say, especially in the last 15 years as people start retiring and whatnot.
Why is that? Because I understand the idea of, I don't want this person taking my job, but has that completely gone away? Or what do you think the main shifts are in our culture where people aren't as reluctant to share information and also to take direction from others?
I think youth of America, just with social media and everything, they're more collaborative for some reason through schooling, or for whatever reason. It just seems it's a little more teamwork driven kind of in some aspects, at least from my point of view anyways. It's just people are easier to get along with, and just the old school, you're hired from the neck down kind of mentality has just gone away.
That's interesting. As you were, navigating the early years of your career, you turned down that first foreman opportunity. How much of that decision do you think was healthy humility, and how much of that was self-doubt?
I would say it was probably 60-40, maybe 60% humility, 40% self-doubt.
Right.
The self-doubt part being that I didn't know what I didn't know at the time.
Right.
And then the humility part, just not knowing, never running a column crew before.
So in your role now as a general superintendent, as you're thinking about promoting guys and gals up from from let's say being a journeyman to foreman to superintendent, how do you balance that dynamic of self-doubt that people might have when you go to them with an opportunity and they're looking at you saying, well, I'm not sure, Doug, if I'm ready for that?
I reassure them that, they know what they do. They know what they're doing. They know the job. They're good workers. They have good work ethic. And I kind of set out what the expectation of a foreman is going to be. It's less doing the work and more managing the work, making sure everybody's kind of got their seat on the bus and they're kind of doing their part of the project. And it works for some guys, and some guys, they're still, nope, I'm good with what I'm doing, which is fine too, because you need those guys as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. So as you were early in your career, but people were seeing the potential in you, what do you think they saw in you that you maybe didn't see in yourself?
It's a great question. I think my ability to solve problems quickly. I didn't wait around too much and overthink everything. If I was to guess, I would probably say that. I just kind of naturally, I knew what the next steps were. I didn't have to keep being reminded what was going on.
So looking at that, the ability to solve problems, how much of that was learned as you were in the trade, and how much of it was you already brought it with you when you were a young person?
I would say most of it was brought in was learned through the trade. Just working with different people. I think the more different people you work with, you got different views that you can kind of pluck all the points that you want to keep, and you can drop the stuff that you don't. But yeah, I would say it was just other people's influences was the main driving, to help me make decisions.
So when you first started, because I mean, coming from a pizza parlor onto a construction site, there isn't a ton of stuff that's similar. Did you have mentors right out of the gate who kind of took you in there under their wing and helped you through and began to point stuff out to you that was helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. Different foremen along the way definitely helped out, saw some potential in me early. I would say after I did finally become a foreman, one of the project executives kind of sat me down and said, you did a really great job, and proud of what I had done, because he had seen me a few years back when I was earlier in my career. And then just a couple of the owners had pulled me aside a couple of times and, said how great they thought I was doing. So that kind of encouragement really helped.
That's really interesting right there, because I mean, at least for me, I wouldn't think of a PX necessarily talking to a foreman. I would think, PX, PMs, that kind of thing. And then the owners specifically talking to you. Tell me more about that.
I think one good thing about Cullen is, it's still a fifth generation family run business. And it just has that kind of family feel to it, where you're not just a number. The owners know your name. When I started, I think it was 10th of the size it is now.
Right.
So they were a lot smaller, and it was easier to know everybody. But that was always one thing that kind of impressed me. The three owners at the time, they all knew my name. They knew where I came from and a little bit of my background, they made an effort to get out and talk to people, which I really enjoyed.
So would they visit the projects and walk the jobs?
Yeah, I think every 6 weeks they have a project like overview visit where executives and stuff come to our projects and take a look. And, they'd stop and ask people what they're doing and get to know some people as best they could.
That's great. That's neat to have that, because it would be easy as an owner or an executive just to kind of get busy, so to speak, and forget that element of connecting with the folks in the field. We talked about seeing the potential in people. How do you slow down someone who's young, who wants to advance quickly? They're not ready yet, but on the other hand, you don't want to kill their ambition, right? You don't want to just say, get out of here, you go dig some more holes. You know what I'm saying? How do you work with someone like that?
I think each person's a little bit different. Like, you definitely have to know who you're talking to. You got to know what drives them. Is it money? Is it the work? What's the one thing that pushes them? And you got to kind of lean into that, reassure them that it's going to happen, start having mentoring sessions with them. Maybe sit down for yearly reviews and start going over things that you got to work on to keep them vested and, don't kill their spirit, but, maybe fuel the fire a little bit.
Yep. Now, when you did move up to foreman, how old were you when you started running crews?
I was probably 23, 24.
So that's still relatively young, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What were some of the biggest mistakes you made right out of the gate that you were like, not going to do that again?
The biggest issue I had was stepping away from the work and trusting others to do it.
Right.
You can't do everything, and that's why you have people working with you so they can help you do it. It took me a while, but as I got older and a little more seasoned, my goal was always to teach everybody how to do everything so I didn't have to do anything.
Right.
And then I would step in and help those that, I could see who were struggling, and gives me time for planning, look ahead, and all that kind of stuff.
That's interesting. How long were you a foreman before you moved up to super?
I would rough guess probably 10 years, 12 years, somewhere in there.
So that sounds like a good, healthy amount of time.
Yeah. Yeah. It was. Yep.
Is that typical in your company that the foreman kind of hang out for a decade before getting promoted, or is it just, it depends?
I think back in the day it was. It feels like that's changing a little bit. If we find someone that they show skills that allow them to manage people well, I think that teaching them how to do the things is kind of the easier part. You train as you go. But back then, when I was, younger, it seemed that was kind of the norm. But yeah, now for sure, it seems like it's speeding up. One, because so many people have retired. The baby boomer generation is retired, and there wasn't enough people to infill behind them. We got to grab the people and kind of push them in the deep end sometimes.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So is part of it just the lack of people that causes folks to get promoted up to super earlier?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, quick break to talk about my book, Construction Genius. This is what I want you to do. Go to Amazon, search for the book, read all of the 5-star reviews, because there's a ton of them. over 50 to be precise. And the reason I want you to read them is because real people wrote those reviews who've actually read the book. And it'll give you an idea of why you should go and buy a copy right now on Amazon. And here's the deal. If you purchase 10 or more copies for your company, and then send me an email, eric@constructiongenius.com, I'll come in via Zoom and do a 1-hour Q&A and a bonus training session with your team at no charge. I normally charge $4,500 for an hour of my time. And again, for you, I'll do it at no charge if you buy 10 or more copies of my book. And the reason you should buy it is all in the title. It's effective, hands-on, practical, simple, no BS, leadership, strategy, sales, and marketing advice for construction companies. So if you're in the construction industry, this book is for you. So you can get it on Amazon. You can also get it on Audible in the audio version as well, narrated by yours truly. And I know you'll really enjoy it. So go out and get the book. And now back to the interview. What was the hardest lesson you had to learn when moving from foreman to superintendent?
Again, that stepping away and allowing the foreman to plan the work and me not tell them what to do. I've tried it both ways and letting them come up with a plan. I got to kind of push them in the right direction. But if someone comes up with their own plan, it seems like they trust it better. They try harder to make it work. Where if you just tell somebody, go do this, then, they don't have the buy-in that's required for them to run the work.
How did that feel? Because one of the things I think people struggle with is when they get promoted, they don't feel like they're working anymore. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
And so they feel guilty. And so they start doing the job of the people who report to them just because it feels better. It feels normal. How did you negotiate all of that so that you stayed focused on what your role and responsibility was as opposed to doing other people's jobs?
I looked at it as if I can keep everything out of the foreman's way, then they're going to make money. So I always looked at it as my job is coordinating all the different contractors on site and puppet master, if you will, for lack of a better term, just to make sure everybody was playing well in the same sandbox.
Yep.
Easier said than done for sure, but has its own set of challenges that can definitely keep you busy.
As a superintendent, then, what are some of the common conflicts you see between foremen, and how do you deal with those?
I think the common issue we have is just communication, just people telling other people what they're going to be doing.
Yeah.
It seems like the biggest thing. 90% of the time, it just comes down to lack of communication. So daily, weekly foreman's meetings, so everybody can talk through their plan for the next day, the next week. Morning huddles, get out in the morning huddles and let everybody know. So maybe the crew members hear the same story, because not all foremen tell the crew members what else is going on site. So just over communicate seems to be the best way to get everybody to play nice together.
What do you do when two foremen just don't like each other?
Well, you got to put your babysitting hat on, I guess, and just be like, now, kids, let's play nice together. We're all grown adults. You put your differences aside and get the job done. And if it escalates, depending on where it escalates to, maybe you just got to ship them off to a different job.
Yeah, that's interesting, huh? So as you moved into general superintendent, going back to your earlier statement that when you first got offered the role of foreman, you were like, nah, I'm not ready yet. When you went to general superintendent, what was that like? Were you like, I'm not sure? Were you like, yeah, I think I can handle this now?
So the guy who had the job before me had let me do some of the tasks, like when we got really busy as far as estimating, things of that nature. So I felt pretty comfortable I could handle it. The biggest thing I've learned is allowing people to grow, give them a long enough leash and give them enough trust that they can make the right decision, but don't give them a long enough leash that they can hang themselves. So just finding that balance to allow people to grow and to make their own mistakes sometimes, because that's usually the best way you learn.
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? Because when you're building a project, obviously you want it to be safe, you want it to be productive, you want to have good quality, and you want to make money. That leash, how do you determine exactly how long to have that leash? Because again, you don't want someone doing something that's going to lose you too much money or definitely not put people in danger. So how does that work? How do you think through that?
Again, it depends on each individual. Start out with a short leash, and the more trust that you build, the longer the leash gets, because not everybody's the same for sure.
That's interesting. And then in your role as a general superintendent now, you work across multiple divisions?
Yes. We have 5 divisions in our company, and I handle the concrete work across all 5 divisions.
That sounds like a lot of work.
It has its challenges for sure.
How do you decide when to step into a situation and when to stay out, especially to avoid stepping on toes while still adding value?
I try to suggest better ways to do it first, depending on the severity of the issue. Again, how long do I want to let that leash out?
Yeah.
Different job teams or, everybody's different. You ended up, ultimately, I put my trust in the job team that, they know the project better than I do most times because they're involved in it on a daily basis. So I have to trust their input. But there are times when I kind of have to put my foot down and say, no, this is how this needs to happen. And I explain why based on my years of experience and, the tricks of the trade, what have you, just to make sure nothing bad happens.
What would you say is one thing that folks in the office, like on the pre-con side or the project management side, what is it the one thing they most often get wrong when it comes to working with people in the field?
Wow, that's a good one. What they get wrong about people that work in the field. I think most of the time there's this office versus field mentality.
Yeah.
More so between the younger people. They just, they don't know where they stand in the pecking order, I guess. So I always encourage the young site engineers to get out in the field, get a little bit dirty.
Yeah.
Definitely helps open up the communication between the field and office guys. Because if they see you doing it, like I said, if they see you doing it, then you can't be all that bad, I guess.
Right. So would you say if someone's been in the business long enough that there's less of that misunderstanding just because everyone begins to get how the business works and how money gets made and why both sides are important?
Yeah, definitely. That would be another huge misconception. The young guys, they don't know what the office guys are doing. So maybe that's where that animosity comes from. But definitely the older guys understand how the business works, like you said, and understand that everybody has their own roles and how everybody helps each other.
It's interesting. You've been with Cullen for 30 years. That's a long time, right?
It's a minute. Yep.
Yep. It goes fast, but it's a long time. I'm assuming that you've had other offers from other companies over the years.
I've had a couple.
Yeah. Why have you not taken them? What is it about Cullen that has caused you to stick with them for 30 years?
Just the feeling, like the family business feeling. There's just multiple times throughout my career where just interactions with the owners, specifically the previous vice president of field operations, we had a pretty good relationship. Just how they treated me. They never gave me a reason to leave. They kept food on my plate. And that was the biggest thing. I never felt like there was any better place to work.
Think about the last time you promoted someone into a leadership role and it failed. Why did it fail? I can tell you one reason. People know how to build projects, but they don't know how to build and lead teams of people. Construction comes with its challenges that only insiders truly understand. Generic leadership training doesn't cut it. You need a program to train your leaders built specifically for construction professionals led by an industry expert. And my online course, The Shift, is exactly that course. It has 5 modules. It'll teach your people how to control their calendars and reduce stress and embrace chaos and accomplish their critical tasks. It will teach them the 3 essential messages they have to communicate every day in order to motivate and lead their team effectively. It'll show them how to build and lead a high-performing team, give them a framework for running effective meetings so they'll be able to solve problems in less than an hour, and also give them a higher perspective on their leadership that will enable them to work on the business and on their teams and not get stuck in the weeds micromanaging. So go out to my website, theshift.constructiongenius.com, read all about the course, and then enroll yourself and your leaders in the course, and I guarantee that it will transform your leadership. If it does not, you take the whole course and you didn't get benefit from it, you just send me an email, eric@constructiongenius.com, and I will cheerfully refund you 100% of your money. I'm really confident this course will transform your leadership. So again, go out to the website, theshift.constructiongenius.com, learn more about the course, and start taking it today. What do you think the leadership of Cullen focuses on to maintain that culture from generation to generation? Because it's a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah, I think their transition period between one generation to the next is great. I don't know all the details about it, but I do know that they have to go work somewhere else for an extended period of time before they
Yeah,
come
yeah,
to Cullen
yeah.
to kind of get their feet wet before they come over. But like I said, the details of it, I'm not 100% sure how it works, but I think that has something to do with it. I think they make the kids work for it from generation to generation, and that seemed their fifth generation, it seems to be working.
Yeah, it's interesting. In my previous conversations with them, the two things that stuck out is that first thing about sending them away to other places to go work.
Yep.
And then the second thing, which really struck me, which I think is kind of cool, is that if you're going to be an owner of the business, you have to be working in the business.
Yeah, they've all started as site engineers and worked their way up. I remember one of our current owners, when he was on site as a summer intern in between during the summer, very eager to learn the business, how we did things, the why behind what we were doing out in the field. I thought was great.
That's awesome. Looking back across your entire career, what leadership mistake taught you the most?
I would say that not everybody's the same. And sometimes understanding that you don't know everything, that you're going to make mistakes, and you just got to dust your boots off and get back at it. Specifically, probably with field personnel development, making sure, like I said, not everybody's the same and you got to do different things with different people. That was probably the hardest thing, I would say.
Does that go back to what you were talking about earlier about understanding what motivates someone?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting because getting outside of ourselves and being able to see it from another person's perspective, that takes time to do for most people.
Yes, yes. And the bigger the company that gets, the harder that process can be to still have that close relationship with everybody. It gets harder and harder the bigger and bigger a company gets.
How do you handle that?
I try to be on site at least from 7 to noon.
Huh.
Different projects out there talking to people, maybe get my hands a little bit dirty just to show them that I do know what I'm talking about sometimes. Definitely goes a long way, especially with the younger guys. If the boss man's out there getting his hands dirty, then
Interesting.
I have no place to be standing around, that's for sure.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. What advice would you give someone who is just starting off in construction in terms of building a great career?
Ask questions. If you don't know how something works, ask the why.
Yep.
I know even through internal reporting and, how we track projects and whatnot, I always asked why, like, hey, what are you doing? How's that work? And, I never sat around waiting for someone to tell me what to do. If I saw something was interesting, I went and found someone that knew how to do it and asked them how they did it. But yeah, don't wait for anybody to tell you what to do. You need to go out there and ask and be driven enough to kind of figure it out yourself sometimes.
Earlier, you talked about, I picked up the idea of, as you were learning, you kind of made a point of not having to be told twice about something,
Yeah.
Is that just something in you, or was there like techniques that you used to make sure that you kind of locked in what was being said?
I think if it's something that I go through myself, if I take a class on something that teaches me how to do, like I wasn't great in school.
Yeah.
One of the main reasons I went into the trades was because, school wasn't my thing, but I knew how to learn things when I did it with my hands. Like that
Right
made
on.
sense. When I could touch, feel something, that made more sense to me. And that's kind of how my brain worked.
Yeah. That's interesting. Interesting. Excellent. Well, I'll tell you, Doug, I really appreciate your time. One last question before you go. What's the major city that you spend most of your time in?
From Madison, Wisconsin, so I wouldn't call it a major city.
But it's a place that people visit.
It's a good size, yeah. We got University of Wisconsin's here.
Yeah.
Huge college town. So, yeah, I was born and raised here and haven't had a good reason to leave yet. So,
what's the one restaurant someone should go to if they happen to be in Madison?
They happen to go to Madison. Absolutely, Fairchild in Rose Street. It won the James Beard Award for top restaurant in the Midwest a couple years ago.
Uh-huh.
And amazing food. It's a seasonal menu, and Madison has a ton of amazing restaurants. But if I had to pick one, it would definitely be Fairchild.
Okay, excellent, excellent. We're going to put a link in the show notes to Fairchild Restaurant. Ooh, it's right there. Ooh, man, that looks legit. Okay, awesome. Awesome. Doug, really appreciate you taking the time to join us here today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been great.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Doug. Feel free to check out in the show notes the links to our other conversations with the Cullen clan. I know that you will enjoy those discussions, and I've also put a link in the show notes to the Fairchild Restaurant. So if you are in Madison, Wisconsin, you can go there for a bite to eat. Share this interview with other folks, and also give the show a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts, and I will catch you on the next episode. Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit, and always remember that the show is brought to you by Kick-Ass Meetings. I've been working with construction leaders since 2004, teaching them how to run extremely effective problem-solving meetings that gets their people collaborating, taps into their creativity, and to get yourself a free copy of the Kick-Ass Meeting Report, go to www.ericanderton.com/kickassmeetings. Grab yourself that free report, read it, use it in your business. You'll find it extremely useful. And thanks again for listening.